Oh, you're as civilized as a rock, aren't you? Wait!
At this point, I'm just over 20 hours into my playthrough of Crimson Desert, and despite feeling like I have done so much, I feel like I've only just started to scratch the surface. I'm slowly working my way through more of the game in order to do a full review later down the line, but for now, I just wanted to join the conversation and share my thoughts. It's a mixed bag. Everyone has said it, it's not a crazy hot take to throw that out there. I land on the side of enjoying it far more than I'm finding it frustrating, but the frustrations are there, and I can easily see how those frustrations can act like 1,000 little paper cuts that eventually kill a person's interest. But still, despite all of its little flaws, I am absolutely loving taking my time enjoying getting lost in a world that is not overly complex, yet is still rich and varied in its locations and activities. What drives that sense of exploration in the world? In a sense, it's the story, but perhaps not in a way you think. There are a lot of issues with how Crimson Desert approaches its narrative, and trust me, we'll talk about that in a moment. But prior to the release of the game, I had seen comments and interviews with Pearl Abyss emphasising that the idea that the story isn't important to Crimson Desert, that while the story is there, it's not what the game is centered around like a traditional RPG like The Witcher 3 or other open world action games Crimson Desert has drawn comparisons to, like Red Dead Redemption 2. Instead, there is a sense that the story is there more as a loose framework, designed to introduce the player to different aspects, mechanics and activities within the sandbox that Crimson Desert presents. There is plenty of things to do in the game, but occasionally you might find yourself at a wall. Maybe you've exhausted a quest chain, or need to come back to an area when you're stronger, or just simply don't know what to do next. Story is there to help send you out to new map areas and introduce you to new activities and quest chains. I'm currently progressing through chapter 4. Maybe through the remaining chapters things will get a little bit more focused, but for now, it does its job. That being said, the story is a big issue for a lot of people, and I totally get why. It was hard not to fall into the hype trap, setting this game up to be the next big game of the year on the same level as the previously mentioned Witcher as an all-time fan favourite. I get it. It feels like a big epic story should go hand in hand with a game like this, but I think Pearl Abyss did a reasonable job in trying to dampen those expectations. But oh my god, did they do an absolutely nonsensical job of implementing what little narrative there is. It's probably the worst aspect of the game for me so far. If I had been someone coming in expecting a story-focused RPG, oh boy, would I have been pissed at the quite frankly terrible introduction to the game, and I too may have been seeking an early refund. While I can get behind Pearl Abyss not focusing on the narrative and accept something that is weak and minimal to do the job it was intended for, I can't fathom why, in a game that is otherwise so well polished and optimised, beside a small handful of bugs, Pearl Abyss would allow this poorly thought out, fragmented, meandering mess to be the thing that greets players. Because regardless of Pearl Abyss's intention with the game and the narrative, despite the promise the open world sandbox has, the story is the first thing that players interact with, and it's hard for it to not leave a sour taste in your mouth. Let's talk about the opening. I'm sure it's been talked about to death already. We start with the meeting of the Greymanes, where we are briefly introduced to some of the Greymane characters that will be present throughout the story. But this meeting is violently interrupted by the Black Bears, a rival mercenary group. We're shown the basics of combat as Cliff fights his way through the burning camp in order to rescue his friends who are all seemingly cut down before Cliff himself is fittingly thrown from a cliff after having his throat slit. None of this has any consequence. Cliff survives, apparently bleeding out from his slit throat, and we relatively quickly reunite with all of the fallen Greymanes who, for the most part, have quickly moved on to regular lives otherwise unscathed. Getting back to the introductory quest though, we return to the world a few months later, with Cliff having been nursed back to health by a friendly cartographer. 4 chapters and almost 30 hours later, and we're yet to see him again. There's a few things we'll need to do before embarking on our quest to restore the Greymanes and get our revenge. We defend our cartographer friend from some bandits extorting money from him, before following him into town to speak to the locals and see if we can discover some rumoured Greymane locations. How do you think we'll do that? I'll give you a few seconds. If you said we start speaking to people, building connections with the locals, and pursuing rumours to rebuild trust in the Greymanes as we track down each of our lost comrades, well, you're dead wrong. Cliff heads into town, has a go at arm wrestling. Oh my god, this minigame only gave me half the instructions for how to play. It took me way longer to figure out than I'd like to admit. Before heading back out to give some coins to the homeless, who just happen to be some kind of wizard or god who gives us something then disappears. We then hear some shouting in the sewer and head down to find another magic lady who gives us something then disappears. It's a nothing burger, just objectives to do for the sake of doing objectives. At every step of the way so far, 4 chapters into the narrative, the game gives no indication of why I'm doing something. So often, a cutscene will just be a conversation that will barely feature any talk of what our task is, and you'll then be presented with an objective that is far more precise than the preceding conversation, or has nothing to do with what has just been said. Another one early on that really stuck out to me was a quest picked up from a poster to help a farmer whose ram had had its horn stolen. I got there to find a manic farmer ranting about how bandits came and raided his home in search of a stone that had fallen from the sky. There was no real mention of his ram at all. He had put a poster up for it. At first, I was even confused if I had gone to the right location and was tracking the right quest. Offering to hunt down the bandits for him and make them pay, I just instantly knew where the bandits were. No need to discuss with anyone and figure out where their hideout is, and when I got there, I looted a ram's horns after viewing a memory with the bandits, talking about how they weren't supposed to take the horns but did because they couldn't find stones. We take the horns back to the farmer, who couldn't care less about them, instead lusting over the stones once he realises their potential value. The stones falling from the sky and being sought after for their power was an interesting through line in some of those early quests, but this just completely missed the mark, making no sense versus what I had just been presented with. And this is extremely common throughout both side and main missions. Often made all the more jarring as voiceover lines and motion capture is often completely mismatched.
Was that rock really worth a man's life?
Now we have to find Hubert.
Dear Savior, I'm ashamed to ask, but please rescue our healer. Without him, our town...
There are often awkward delays between lines of dialogue, and a line that might be calmly spoken may have the motion capture for a character being extremely dramatic. It's really hard to get behind even a basic narrative when it gives you basically no information about what is happening, but then also when it does give you information, it makes absolutely no sense. While the narrative may be a bit rubbish, completing those objectives is often a joy, because the world is absolutely phenomenal. Genuinely one of the most detailed worlds, from lighting to texture to how things interact. The level of detail is absolutely insane. While the main story wasn't the focus of Crimson Desert, it's clear its world is. It's full of things to explore, resources to exploit, and the world feels rich and natural. It feels lived in. As I get to unexplored areas of the map, I'm almost always treated to a new and interesting piece of scenery, from impressive views to ruins or unique villages. While the graphics and world are truly impressive, there were a few things that I wasn't a massive fan of, wind being one of them. It's handled quite dynamically and makes some cool interactions on large objects like trees and clothing. However, for things like shop signs and flowers in the grass, it sends them flying far more aggressively that becomes really hard not to notice once you've seen it. You might have leaves and cloth swaying gently, and audio that's a gentle breeze, with flowers flapping about like they're in a hurricane. And I might get crucified for this, but I'm not a huge fan of interiors at night. I get it's all about the realistic graphics, but it's a game and I want to be able to see. And I really dislike that the fires, lanterns and candles the world is lit by bathe everything in this horrible orange light. Sure, it's realistic, but if I wanted real, I'd go outside. Sometimes interacting with the beautiful world could be a bit of a pain though, as controls aren't great. Again, this is something that's had a lot of discourse online, and while they aren't particularly intuitive, and there's little cohesion between the controls, they aren't that bad. It takes a little getting used to, but once you do, it's fine. Once you do get used to it though, certain elements like the combat really come into their own for being an absolute blast. The combat controls are relatively simple and easy to switch between different moves, and it flows really well. I might one moment shield slam someone into the ground, then stab my sword into their face to finish them off, jump back up to drop kick someone, and transition a counter into getting behind them and slitting their throats. The combat animations and moves dynamically adjust to your relative position to an enemy, keeping the combat fun, engaging, and varied. Where I have found combat a little frustrating at times is how it handles different types of combat. Between 1 to maybe 10 enemies, it feels amazing. As you start including more enemies, it starts to get a little hectic. While you can easily take on dozens and dozens of foes all at once, or as a steady stream of new enemies joining the fray, and the game will absolutely throw small hordes of enemies at you, it all really comes down to how the enemies are reacting to you. Sometimes they will keep their distance as if they're in fear of you, but other times you might find yourself being assaulted from all angles. Crimson Desert's combat sometimes feels like it wants to have its cake and eat it too. You cut your way through multiple enemies like butter in a way that feels close to a game like Dynasty Warriors. But you're also expected to dodge, parry and counter enemy attacks, which can be almost impossible when you're getting hit from all directions. Those actions can also sometimes feel a little unresponsive, and outside of some boss actions, enemy attacks can be a little hard to spot and time your reaction to when you have so much going on. It's a minor issue and seems to be less and less of an issue as I improve my gear and upgrade my health, but all that really means is I can tank the hits better. And if you have enough food on you, you can just spam use it to heal your way through pretty much anything. This doesn't really stop the combat being fun though. I find myself frequently stopping as I'm riding between locations to take out even small groups of enemies. There are plenty of roaming patrols and locations that need liberating to satiate your bloodlust when you have it, but the map also isn't swarming with enemies, allowing you to take the moments you need to breathe and explore the world, and do tasks like trade and resource gathering without having to worry about when you will next be jumped by a roaming group of enemies. I'm also really excited for mounted combat, particularly the dragon, which I haven't unlocked yet. Information surfacing online seems to suggest that non-horse mounts such as the bear and raptor featured in trailers are only available temporarily and will become aggressive to you again after being dismounted. A particular nuisance since any cutscene will dismount you and dismiss your mount, so no taking fun mounts into missions with you. I can't verify it, but if this is true, this is a really big disappointment. Mounts and dragons were a particularly strong selling point for me, and it feels a bit like a bait and switch if this aspect of the game is heavily restricted versus what the game has presented through trailers and adverts heavily focusing on mounted combat and dragons as a feature. But combat and mounts are just one of the many activities to do in Crimson Desert, from mini games like arm wrestling and rock paper scissors, combat tournaments and arenas, fishing, crafting and the associated resource gathering, building a settlement for the Greymanes with companions that can be sent out on missions, trade networks to set up between different areas of the world, and supply agreements that can be forged with certain vendors to provide resources to your settlement, or even just simple exploration and puzzles. There is so much to do, and not all of it is as deep as forging relationships with local factions and setting up trade, but it's all pretty rewarding. One of the big issues with Crimson Desert is that it really likes to not provide the player with much information at all. Sure, there is a knowledge codex giving information on all the people that you've met and places you've been, and logs of tutorials that pop up, but I always found those to be somewhat lacking. There's never enough information for this to be meaningful, and the tutorials are often incomplete or lacking vital aspects needed to actually do the thing correctly. Fishing is a prime example of this. Tutorial gives you a really basic overview of how to fish, so you know in theory what you have to do. It tells you to catch a fish and reel it in when it gets hooked by moving the rod, but it doesn't tell you that you need to wait for a fish to tire out before you can reel it in. When you do fail and fail again because you don't know this, the game doesn't say why you failed, just that the fish got away because of your control. Once you figure it out, fishing, like many of the other tasks, actually become super simple. And this can be quite frustrating at first, but I quickly started to appreciate Crimson Desert trusting me to explore activities and mechanics by myself. In a gaming market where it feels more and more like your hand is being held and solutions are dropped at your feet just seconds after encountering a problem, it was actually quite refreshing. Now, bug and performance wise, I've had no issues at all with the performance. I'm playing on the base PS5 and the performance has been genuinely impressive. I've for the most part kept it on balanced mode setting for a good balance between performance and quality, and I've not noticed any dropped FPS or anything like that, even when fighting in areas such as the quarry where I've been easily engaging with 20 enemies at once, explosive barrels are popping off everywhere, and dozens more NPCs are lingering around in the area. I have though encountered some bugs. As of recording this video, a recently announced patch should have rectified these issues, but I think it's worth mentioning still. Most noticeable bugs have been the map issue, which has caused the PS5 to freeze completely and require a hard reset. HDR and certain other settings were being forgotten about after restarting the game. With HDR in particular, I'd also noticed that the nits number needed to reach for maximum brightness to get rid of the image on your screen was different every single time. I don't think the numbers it tells you actually matter, and from what I've seen from performance breakdowns, they actually don't relate to the nits value that your monitor or TV will output. I've also noted that the options menu occasionally got stuck on certain screens, like you would switch over to the map, it would stick on the map even though you could still move between the different tabs, and that would require you to go off and on again. For a game so big, I'm impressed with the engine optimization, outside of the initial load into the save being a tad on the longer side of 30 seconds plus for the base PS5. Once in-game, loading is actually surprisingly quick when loading between fast travel points and the Sky Abyss area. Now, there's a lot I haven't covered here. There is a lot I have yet to discover, and a lot I have still only touched the surface of and need to explore further. I'm not ready yet to do something more in depth, but I will once I've sunk a lot more time into Crimson Desert and progressed a lot further. If there's anything else you think is worth discussing in particular, let me know in the comments and we can discuss it in the next video. Until then, I have a settlement to build and a dragon mount to hunt down. Stick around, like, comment, subscribe, and all that stuff I'm obligated to ask you to do, and I'll see you around.